Hello, beauties. Welcome back to the podcast. Happy Thriving Thursday. So, as you know, I was just in Iceland. I just got back yesterday, and I was going to maybe try to record a podcast episode today, but I was like, I'm not going to put too high of an expectation on myself because I normally like to give myself the first day back from travel just completely off to like reset, unpack, and do all the things. And I actually did end up getting some work done today. I've been very actually efficient and productive today, and I'm very proud of myself. But somehow the time got away from me, and it's already 6 p.m. And I was like, yeah, I don't really feel like recording an episode if I don't have to, because I knew that I had this one in my back pocket, and I've been wanting to post it, so I think it's the perfect time. So this is actually a repost of an episode of someone else's podcast, the Inner Path podcast, that I was a guest on with the host, Bia Rodriguez. And I actually just ended up loving the episode so much. And like, not gonna lie, you guys, I crushed it. I felt like it was just so on fire. We were having a really great conversation. So many really awesome themes were coming up. And honestly, I dove into especially intuition and how to tap into your intuition and how to listen to your intuition and really like all of my like magic methods for connecting to your intuition and really awakening it and enhancing it and listening to it and all those things more than I ever have on my own podcast. And I was like, damn, I just gave such a thorough, good answer. And like, I've been wanting to bring that to this podcast and it just haven't really it hasn't come up or I haven't recorded that specific episode. So I was like, you know what? Instead of trying to recreate the wheel, why don't I just ask Bia if I can repost the podcast or repost the episode on Thriving? And she was more than happy to let me do that. So thank you so much, Bia. And you guys are really in for a treat. It was an amazing episode. We talked a little bit about my story again. If you've listened to episode 1 of this podcast, then you know my story already, but it's a little bit of a different angle. I tell it different every time. So, a brief recap of my story, or if you haven't listened to that episode, then you'll get to know a little bit more about my background, kind of how I got to where I am. And of course, a little bit of Bia's story as well, which is cool. We actually ended up having a lot of similarities in our stories. And then we talked a lot about self-love and really the role it plays in healing and really how to get into self-love, how it actually, what that actually looks like. It's really easy to say, love yourself more. And, I'm always saying on this podcast, self-love is the key to everything. It's all about love. But it's how do you act? What does that actually mean? How do you really start to, love yourself more and work on your own healing? We talked about both of our experiences with toxic relationships and leaving those and finding your way back to self-love after that, which is funny. I feel like it's a lot of similar themes that Sindri and I were just talking about part of our last episode. So it's just funny how that always happens. We also talked a lot about personal responsibility, what it means to be ready or to not be ready, and taking your healing and your growth and your journey and your life into your own hands. And not that there is a right or wrong approach to this, but kind of, how to approach your healing from a place of really self-love and self-compassion, and a common mistake that people often make when they start to go into healing and personal development. We talked about burnout and finding your purpose, how to get clarity if you're feeling confused on your path, how to really surrender and trust your path, feeling your feelings, and what the difference between toxic positivity and actual positivity is, and really how to allow yourself to feel your feelings, and how to know when it's the right time for a perspective shift and to try and cheer yourself up, and when you actually just maybe need to let yourself be sad and go for a sad girl walk. Then I really dove deep into my process with intuition, really how I reconnected to my intuition back from being fully disconnected, and really the step-by-step you can take if you do feel like I don't even know where to start, or if you're anywhere along the line, really just tangible, practical tips, exercises you can use, how to really practice on a daily basis, how to really tune into your body and know what a yes and a no is in your body, how to really feel your intuition through those channels. We even talked a little bit about nervous system and embodiment work. We really went everywhere. And so much more that I don't even remember because we recorded this a while ago at the beginning of my summer vacation, actually. But it's a great episode and lots of great perspective. And I'm really excited for you guys to meet Bea and to hear everything that we talked about. So that is what we have in store for you today. 2 guest podcasts in a row. Although technically I was the guest on this one. So yeah, just like be aware, like Bea, it might sound weird because I'm going to be switching and then Bea will be leading the podcast. But yeah, that's what it is. So anyway, thank you so much for listening. I love you guys. Make sure to go follow Bea. I believe she is just Bea Rodriguez Official on Instagram, and The Inner Path is her podcast. Of course, I will link her stuff in the show notes. And without further ado, here is my conversation with Bea. Hi, I'm John Ray, and welcome to the Thriving Podcast. I'm your host and intuitive coach, dedicated to amplifying your intuition, transforming your mind, and igniting your inner magic to create a life you're obsessed with. 2 years ago, I was burnt out as fuck in a toxic relationship and a successful tech career that I just wasn't happy in anymore. I left it all behind with no plan, and now I'm running my own business, immersed in purpose and passion, happily married to my soulmate, and living out my dreams every single day. And if you're badass enough to be listening to this podcast, then you're already on the fast track to doing the same, babe. On this podcast, we'll dive into all things life, business, heart, mind, body, and soul, empowering you to up-level your life and embody your happiest, healthiest, and hottest self. It's time to make idealistic your new realistic, because you're not just here to survive, you're here to thrive.
Hi, how are you? Welcome to the podcast. I'm really excited to have you here.
Thank you so much, Bea. I'm so excited to be here.
Yes. Okay. So, let's just start with, I guess, what I always start with, which is how did you get into kind of this area of personal development, healing? You do coaching. I'd love to know more about that story because I think it's always a good way to get started into the conversation.
Okay, yeah. So like, how did I even kind of like first have my like spiritual growth, personal growth, like awakening, like my entry into the world?
Well, if actually I just remember, like, if you want to introduce yourself first, that's also good.
I was like, maybe she's gonna introduce me like beforehand.
I will,
Yeah, okay.
but if you want to give
I'll
your
kind
own.
of just give like a little spiel.
Yeah.
So my name is John Marie. I'm an intuitive life and business coach. I work primarily with aspiring and early stage entrepreneurs, typically like building an online business or a personal brand. And early stage is kind of a flexible term. But it's typically like in the 0 to 2 year range. And what I really focus on with clients is I'm kind of like the manifestation queen and like the intuition manifestation queen, I guess. I'll claim them both. And really, we focus on just like feeling good in business because business, a lot of the time, it's this very, work, career, anything money related in general. Like it's this very strategic thing, this very like work hard. And like there's so much stuff floating around and it's very stressful, but it doesn't have to be. And it's actually not supposed to be, especially for us as women. Like we're meant to magnetize and lead with desire. So, and I was totally in this place, which is another reason why I feel so passionate about it. But, like it's not supposed to be this hard, stressful thing. So anytime when you're finding yourself being so overwhelmed and stressed, things feel forced in business or like it's so confusing and complex, especially starting out. It's like, well, you're getting overwhelmed by all these terms. What's a funnel? Do I need a marketing campaign? Like, what am I supposed to do ads? Where should I spend the most time? Like, which platform should I choose? And I'm like, no. Like, what feels good? What would be fun? Like, what do you want to do in business, right? You don't actually have to fit yourself into any box. And especially when all these strategies are being talked about all the time, like we think we should be doing it one way. And it's actually like there's no should. You're meant to do it the way that you're desiring to do it. And I always say complexity is a red flag. So it's like back to basics. How can we make it simple? And how can we really tap into intuition and then filter that through a strategic lens instead of like the other way around and trying to force yourself into a box? So I'm my girls in my program right now, they keep saying like, I feel like I'm just like walking on rainbows. Like, I'm like, that's kind of the approach I take to business. I'm like the energetic side, like really helping you bring more of you into your business and like do it your way and really find that flow and that fun. So that's what I do kind of like on the business side. And then in terms of just kind of who I am and how I got here, like I said, about, I don't know how many years ago. Well, I left. Let me go back to the beginning. And I'm going to simplify it as much as possible. And then we can always go deeper into any point. So basically, I was a very closed off person. back like in high school, very close, disconnected from my emotions, right? I was like, ask me how I am. Like literally there'd be people like my family, my sister would be like, John, like, how are you? And I would be like, shut up, don't ask me. Like, I was like, don't ask me how I'm feeling because I was so disconnected. Like I got really triggered by even just like those simple things. Forget about like actually going through like a hard experience. I was just like, bottle it up, like forget about it, very averse to feeling negativity in any way. And I was like kind of a loner, but it was weird because I always had this dichotomy of like I was at like the bubbly cheerleader, like I was super social and popular in high school, but like then I would go home and I would just like be depressed like on my Tumblr blog, like I'm forever alone. So it was like this very compartmentalized thing. I was like very out of balance and just disconnected from my truth really. And I was very much like I don't know what I want to do with my life, like I hated talking about college. I was like, I don't want to go. I hated change. I was like, no change for me. I just want to stay in my comfort zone, And I was like, not even aware that, like of the concept of comfort zone, you know. And so kind of when I like really woke up to that was, I honestly, there was no big turning point when I got introduced to the work. I just started coming across it. Just started coming across like manifestation on YouTube. Clark Kegley was someone that influenced me a lot when I was first starting out. I remember I got the book E Squared by Pam Grout, which was like an introduction to law of attraction. And I was like, didn't really understand, but I was like, this feels true. Like this feels like how things work. And I just kind of started to dive into that. And I just had this epiphany kind of after like 6 months to a year of listening to podcasts and watching videos of like that I was holding myself back in all these ways. And that was when it finally clicked and I broke through that like, oh, I'm the limit. It's not like there's just some rule and law of the universe that says, John Marie, like you're only smart enough to do this thing and you can't do that thing. Right. And I was like, oh, I'm getting chills right now as I say this. Yeah. Like I was like, oh my God. And I literally had like this list of all these things that I wanted to do and I wanted to be. It was like, it would be so cool if like I was a guitar player and I could sing and I was a singer-songwriter and I did music, or like I really wanted to be a traveler and I wanted to travel all the time, right? But I was just like, those things are like out of my, like they're just not in my path. And so I had this epiphany. I was like, oh my God, like they could be in my path if I put them there, like if I put myself on that path. And it was like mind blowing at the time. And so that was the end of 2018. So going into 2019, I set like 20 resolutions and goals. And I made my I wish list, my I will list is how I like to describe it. And I was like, everything I wish could be true, I'm going to make it true. And I did. Like I thrived in 2019. I went on so many trips, like I drove through a snowstorm like to Cleveland so I could sing with Brendan Urie from Panic at the Disco, flew across the country on my own, like so many things I had never, like I hadn't been in an airport in like since I was a kid. I just picked up guitar, started teaching myself guitar. I went to voice lessons, like started doing open mic, started writing my own songs, and just like really started to come back to myself and really like let myself grow into who I was. Because I know we talked about this a little bit with the relationships, but, simultaneously, I had been in this like 6-7 year relationship. It was coming up on the 7th year. And I hadn't realized, I mean, I felt things were shifting, passion was dying, all these kind of things, but I hadn't realized really how much of myself I was suppressing so that I could stay in that relationship. There were parts of me, I got into it pretty young, and there were parts of me that were wanting to come out and value systems that I was noticing, and I would like, start to sprinkle, and I would like be kind of shut down and be like, well, you don't really think that. And I'd be like, yeah. And I would kind of just like, okay, well, like clearly I can't explore this because then like I'm gonna have to change, or then like people in my life aren't gonna like me. And like, I can't, like, it wasn't even, again, an option in my mind that like I could leave this relationship, right? It was like all I knew. But basically by the time I got to the end of that year of really just letting myself be free, it was just painfully clear of like what was still holding me back and what was not in alignment. Like I had like shifted all the way up here, and these two things were like, not they were both like the relationship and my job was the other one, right? Like they were great people and great situations, but they felt like this just like cement block that was chaining me down. I was like, I just can't do it anymore. So I ended the relationship. And at that point in my life, that was the hardest emotional experience I had ever gone through. And it really just broke me open and kind of forced me to confront all of these emotions and this pain and these fears that I'd been avoiding my entire life. So it was like I went into this very kind of dark place, but I needed to go there because I had never let myself go there before, and that was also overlapping directly with quarantine. So it was like a very low period of isolation and really just being forced to like be with myself, and just navigating and figuring out how to get through that. And I was still at my job, it was like one big scary change at a time, but that was also dragging me down. And so kind of from like 2020 to 2022 was this like, you know, going through navigating, trying to come out on the other side, having all these things, old patterns come up. And it was in 2021 that I first joined my first like coaching program called Embodied Love, was with Matt Kama. And it was because I knew, I had like gotten into all these like situationships, and I noticed like, I was like, I don't know how to be alone. Ever since I left this relationship, I'm like attaching and clinging to any kind of attention and validation I can get. And so I was like, I need to learn how to love myself. Like I was aware of that much. I was like, I don't know what's going on subconsciously. Like I had heard like shadow work, like, and I was like, I don't know how to get there, but I want someone to show me. So I joined this program, and that was my introduction. And again, I'm trying to keep it short. So da 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 da. I got into another toxic relationship, kind of had another like slingshot moment.
Yeah.
Like after that, it was kind of like my final test. And then after I left that relationship, this is late 2022, I met my husband. I left my job. I got the inspiration to start my business. And I like to make sure I get all the way there with the story, because it's like literally as soon as I left those misaligned situations that were burning me out and draining me, everything, it was like snap, 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 bam, bam, like miracles dropping in, like in those two portals of my life, like my love life, my relationship, and my career, that I felt so lost in and so just like a mess in for so long. All of a sudden, like perfect alignment, perfect clarity, like excitement, joy, healthy motivation, and like everything. So that's kind of how I got into it, a little bit about, or a lot of it about my journey and kind of how I got to where I am.
No, I love that. That is such a crazy ass story. Honestly, I'm so glad you like just put us through all of that and really like guided us through that story, because that was a journey. And sometimes like, I do feel like people want kind of like a fast way to do things, but sometimes it does take like a few years, and that's okay, because while you're like going through all of those things, you're growing, you're learning about yourself, and like one thing at a time, one piece at a time, you're like building yourself back up into this new version of you, and you new version of your reality. And so many of the things you said, like so relate with, because I was also in a very toxic relationship for 7 years. We started really young, so I know how hard it is.
7-year mark.
Yeah, the 7 year mark. Like it was almost there actually. Like it wasn't fully 7 years. It was like
Yeah, neither was mine. Yeah, it was like December we
Yes.
broke up, and our 7 would have been in April.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like it's really challenging that way, but it's beautiful how like when you get into this, journey of spirituality, self-awareness, and you find that path because you're meant to find it. Certain pieces start coming up, like, oh, there's healing here to be done. Oh, there's this thing in my life that like blah blah. Oh, there's this disconnection, and like little by little, you're building like this person back up. And because I feel like sometimes, and one thing that you said is that it took you a while to realize, like, oh, like I am limiting myself. Like I'm the reason why certain things aren't, working out, or I'm the reason why I'm feeling blocked in this path or whatever. Because for a long, long time, we're just either putting the blame on other people, or we are kind of blaming the universe or the stars or the Mercury retrograde or whatever. I have definitely been through that phase of spirituality where I was just like, yeah, I guess the Mercury's in retrograde now. It's you, bitch. It's just you. Uh, I just find that it's so interesting, because when you start taking that responsibility and you realize that you are meant to follow that alignment. You're meant to follow what makes sense and not just stay because it's comfortable, because it's familiar, not just stay because, it's all that you've ever known, it's all that you've ever been. Like, you really get to change. And as soon as you started kind of releasing that, which is basically like releasing your old self, you finally had space to like become the new version of you, like to fully like be reborn. And I really think that's a beautiful journey because again, sometimes I do think we put ourselves with certain expectations of what that journey has to look like. We see these people online and they're just like, if you change this mindset shift, suddenly like everything is different. And of course that's true, but it's a fucking journey. So, just also have compassion with yourself and go on that path while appreciating the journey and while realizing that every single step of the way you're doing more and more for yourself, and it's so beautiful. And I'm really glad that you got to share that and that you got to go through that journey, because now you also have the tools and you have the wisdom to teach other people how to understand their own intuition and how to follow that. Yeah.
Totally. And thank you so much. And I'm so happy that you called that out because, the fact that it's not a linear path, and we all know that, and we hear people say that, healing isn't linear. But, as you call that out, I noticed like even in my story, I'm like, telling it and I'm like, and then I had this, epiphany, and then I woke up to this thing, and then I almost feel like I'm like, do I even mention how after I like had this huge high, then I like had this other toxic relationship, and I'm like, could I just skip over that so that the story feels more cohesive, but
Yeah.
I'm like, no, because it's important to realize that no, like I had been in my healing process, I had gone through this self-love program and done all these things, had all these wins, right, for like 3 years or 2 years, 3 years. And then even after that, I fell back into this really toxic relationship for a year of my life. Like I went back there, And so it's like it wasn't just this like improvement, improvement, improvement. And although it was, it's indirect improvement because that's all a part of like bringing you to that place. But it was like, no, there were ups and downs, and they're always going to be, because it's like every time we peel a new layer, we need that final test. And like when I reflected on that, looking back, I was like, oh, it makes perfect sense. I fell into that relationship right after. It was so funny. Like the day that I like graduated, like that self-love program, I flew to this festival and I met this guy. And it was like literally, I said, okay, universe, I'm ready to manifest love in my life. I went through this program. I love myself. I know I'm worthy. Let's do it, bitch. And I was even like, not looking for anyone, like, because I felt so good. I was like, I'm ready to date myself, but I was basically, the universe was like, okay, bet, like, here's your final test. Let's see if you really are ready to like show this through your actions that you really feel worthy of this love. Gave me this guy that instantly was not aligned, right? Like red flags on the very first day. I walked into his apartment and like we just met. We're going to this festival, and he like offers me like 7 different kinds of drugs. Like
Oh my God.
I was just like, oh, no, thanks, not really my thing, like, and then like proceeded to, whatever. So just like, I needed that because it was like, all right, clearly I'm not as ready as I thought I was, and I needed to get to like this new low to really choose myself in the face of being confronted with that fear at this whole new level, to get back up. So I think it's really important to remember, yeah, that like there's no straight path. And just because you have those dips, it doesn't mean that like you're any less than, or you're any less capable, you're any less far along, because especially even like as healers and coaches, it can feel like, well, I need to be perfect and I need to know like I can't like be going through like these bad emotions, because like then who am I to help other people? And it's like, no, we all go through that, right? It's about accepting and embracing and navigating. And how are you going to continue to up level and grow if you don't go through that, right? Like if you're going a really long time without any kind of dip like that, I'm concerned, because there's no growth, right?
Yeah.
If there's no change and there's no challenge. So I think that's really, really important to remember. Um,
Wow.
one
I
other
love.
thing that you said that I wanted to just touch on really quickly
Mhm.
was on the note of having that epiphany and having that realization, and how that is really like such a pivotal moment. And I forgot exactly how you phrased it that, reminded me, but I just did a podcast episode on this too of, like how you can't force like when you have that moment because like the way that I was learning about these concepts for almost a year and then it all suddenly clicked and I was like, oh, and so I think it's so important to like realize that too of like you will realize things, you will have the epiphanies and the breakthroughs when you're ready for them. If you're not ready to receive it, it won't happen. Just on that same note of like, you can't force anything. It's like someone could have told me till they're blue in the face, like you could do this. I would just be like, no, I can't. It wouldn't even register because we're literally not on the same frequency. Like we are literally
Yeah.
not speaking. We're not on the same frequency. It cannot meet and connect. So I just
Mhm.
think that's so important to remember too. And like, that's why I think it's important to continue to plant the seeds and put this message out there because there are going to be people listening that it's not landing and they're just kind of like, yeah, yeah. And they don't really, they're not ready for that breakthrough moment. There are going to be people who it's like planting a seed for. They're maybe a little bit open. It's still not like they're going to go fly across the country tomorrow, but this is moving them along that path. And there are going to be people who are right in that moment where it's like, oh, I have energy moving. So there's got to be someone who's in this moment right now who is like, that is what I needed to hear. Like, I'm ready to do the thing. So just remembering kind of on theme of like everything you were just saying is that everyone is on their own path and your path is your path for a reason. And there's no timeline, there's no comparison, there's no right or wrong or anything like that. And just trust your own journey. And the more that you try to force yourself to follow any journey that you think you should be on, right? Or to progress at any rate that is not the rate that you're just naturally progressing, like the more you're actually going to hold yourself back.
Oh my God, this is such a preaching session, honestly. Like, I love it. Because, like, oh, wow, so many things are just resonating so much. Like, I generally feel like it's when you're starting that self-love or self like improvement journey,
Mm-hmm.
and you're starting to gather all this knowledge, it can feel really frustrating because you feel like you're like watching all these people, they're super wise all the time, and you're just like, going through the shit. But like something that I really want people to know is like it adds up. And that's why you need to stay consistent. That's like the most important part. Everything else doesn't
Yes.
fucking matter. The consistency is
Mm-hmm.
it's what really is going to make the difference. Like when I was going through that relationship and a part of me knew that I had to break up, but I wasn't fully ready to go there. I was
Mm-hmm.
still building up on that self-love. I was showing up for my shadows. I was going to therapy, doing inner child work. Like all those things were adding up. And only after a year did I have my moment of my epiphany. And I was like, this doesn't serve me anymore. I mean, it
Yeah.
didn't serve me
Yeah.
like a year before,
Mm-hmm.
and honestly, the entire relationship, it didn't serve me. But only at that point did I actually have that like full integration moment of like,
Yes.
okay, like it really isn't for me. Like this doesn't resonate anymore. Like this doesn't serve me. Like it's time to go. And I was in acceptance of that,
Yes.
because your brain can know so much, but it's like one thing is your brain, another thing is kind of the body and brain and
Mm-hmm.
full energy and your full kind of frequency, like you were
It's one thing
saying.
to know it, it's another thing to embody it.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And the embodiment is what takes, more time because we all learn so much. Like there's so much knowledge out there, okay? Like there's so many podcasts, there's so many like I don't know, like books, all of that stuff. And it's so important to, continue to learn and continue to like repeat those things to yourself. That definitely helps. But it's a journey and it's going to take time to like fully become the message, right?
100%. It takes time. And, oh God, what did you, oh, I was going to say, I love that this is what's coming through because literally I just put this podcast out episode yesterday and I had pulled an oracle card to actually inspire the episode. So this must be like a collective thing that is needing to be heard right now. And that is like on a lot of people's minds. Um, And what you said about it took like a year. Like I was kind of aware, but like it took a year until I was really there. And like that's how I was when I was in that toxic relationship, right? Like I was there for a year. I knew from the beginning, from like the first week, right? From the first day, this is not for me. And I would have conversations with people where I was like, yeah. this is not a good situation. I know I should leave, but I'm just like not ready. I know it's going to be hard to leave and I'm not ready to do the hard thing. And I just kind of named it for what it was, so going back to what you were saying about it's you, bitch, right? Like just not being victim and just like really owning your choices, whether that is like, actually, I feel like I just need to go lower. It's the same as like with feeling emotions, right? It's like if you're trying to like just jump to being happy when you're feeling sad and be like, just feel happy, it's not going to work, right? You actually have to like go into the belly of the beast and like fully feel and allow that to be expressed. And so for me, it was like, that expression was like putting myself through this toxic relationship. Like I needed to go through that low and allow myself to fully feel that pain in order to come out. I wouldn't have been able
Yeah.
if I had somehow, like if someone like whatever, and I left that relationship, then I would have went into another because I just wasn't ready
Yeah.
for that yet. I had more to feel and more to learn.
Yeah.
And
Actually,
it's yeah.
I just want to say something that, came through as you were speaking, like,
Mhm.
because the reason why you got into that relationship was because there was still work to be done, not just in the kind of in the wound. Like the wound was still open and
Mhm.
you needed to fully feel it in order to like overcome it. Because otherwise, like you said, you were just going to continue to repeat that same pattern and that same story with different characters over and over again because there was still like that pain inside of you that you were not,
Mhm.
like acknowledging. But once you went through it, you were kind of confronted with that pain. You were kind of confronted
Mhm.
with that wound or that limiting belief, whatever it is. And that's when you have the potential to wake up to it and to, fully immerse out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. It's like you have to fully face it. And something like my first mentor, Matt Comment, like I mentioned, said is face it, feel it, free it, right? Like you have to face it, you have to fully feel it, and then it can be free. But you have to go through that full process of 100%. Yeah, just like open arms, like, let me feel this pain. And it's not easy a lot of the time. And the reason why I think, this can be such a slow process is because, like you said, like we have to get our bodies on board. So our brain can be on board, but it literally takes time for our body to get on board because our body, like our nervous system is designed for homeostasis and balance. And so every step along the way, it's trying to find new balance, trying to find balance again. And so the only way we really can grow and go through this process is a slow, sustainable way. Like you said, like consistency, small, consistent changes. And that's with everything in life, right? Like with any goal, with any kind of healing or anything, like it's actually physically impossible to just bounce like up. Like you can't just like stretch your nervous system out and be like, this is our new normal. It's like, I'm over here, right? I like to use this analogy of like you're standing on one side of the room. You can't just like jump to the all the way to the other side of the room. You have to walk across, right? And so the longer you spend trying to avoid that and trying to just figure out how can I jump to the other side of the room, the longer you're just standing there and you're in the
Yeah.
same spot. And the sooner that you accept, oh, I just have to start walking, then the sooner you make the progress. And it's still a process to walk across, but that's the only way you can really get there is you have to allow your nervous system, and everything, like you said, to integrate slowly over time. All those things you were doing, like working on your shadows and therapy and this and that was like another step across and another piece integrating until every part of you physically, energetically was in alignment. And of course,
Yeah.
when I say you can't leap, like there are different modalities you can do to
Mhm.
accelerate that process, but it's still going to be always capped at like, what is your nervous system's capacity?
Exactly.
Sometimes I'll be like, I really feel like I need to cry, but my body's not ready to cry. So it's like, if I try to just force myself to have a big sob session, right, that's not serving me as much as just like, what if I just let myself just be sad and just go on a sad girl walk and listen to sad music and then the tears will come when they're ready.
I love the sad girl walk for the win. I love that so much. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, no, sad girl walks
Like,
are underrated, right? It's all about the hot girl walks, and I am
yeah, yeah, yeah.
all about the hot girl
Oh,
walks.
exactly, exactly. We love that.
But sad girl walks, it's like you got to know, right? Like when is it time for a hot girl walk and when is it time for a sad girl walk, right? Because if
Like,
a lot, like this is honestly like a big misconception, I feel like, and again, this is so where I came from. So I love this is what's coming up is, I'm feeling sad. I need to go for a hot girl walk to cheer myself up, right? Sometimes
that's
it is what you need if you are on that precipice, But sometimes you need that sad girl walk because, again, you need to go lower still before you can go high. So it's like, when people say toxic positivity, I think that's really what they're meaning is like, know when you need the reframe and when you're ready for that, and know when, don't skip over that acceptance phase and that forgiveness phase and that kind of like shaming phase, right? I always say, like, we can't come into it like, okay, well, how do I heal this? If you're already coming from this place of like, because it's bad and it needs to be fixed, right? And so it's like
Mhm.
finding, going back to what you said before, and like your whole thing, I know, is like self-love, is like finding that self-love and that self-compassion in literally every moment. And we have to constantly remind ourselves of that because it really doesn't come naturally most of the time, especially if this is like new to you.
Exactly. Oh, I'm loving this. You're so wise, girl. No,
Oh, thank you so much.
no, because honestly, like this is such a powerful conversation. I had no idea we would be talking about this, but I do feel like sometimes there is like a lot of like guilt and shame around the like our own pace in this journey because we're seeing everyone talking about like the quantum leaps and all of that. And it's not that it's not possible to, like you said, accelerate, your process,
Hmm.
but your nervous system, your body will still have a process. It will still need time, whatever that time looks like. Sometimes certain changes take like real, like, maybe a few days, maybe a few months. Some take years, like, and that's not weird, and that's not like
Hmm.
there's nothing wrong with you because of that. And what you were saying with the like, I'm feeling bad, let me go for a hot girl walk to just like turn it up. But it's like, yes, sometimes you need that, like you said, but other times you really need to sit through it. And that's a matter of really listening to your intuition and your heart. And
Yes.
I'd love to know about kind of your journey into that, because I feel like that's kind of key for, all of this that we're talking about, for starting a business. If you want to start a business, from really understanding what is your purpose, like what are the things that light you up, like what is your body asking you? Is it asking you to like have a cry and sob, rage session, or is it asking you to like pump it up, to dance, to like twerk, whatever it is, right? How do you get to that point where you're listening to that?
100%. That is such a great question. So I'm so happy you asked that because, yeah, that's so true. Like, I'm saying, well, you got to know when you need a sad girl walk, when you need a hot girl walk. And there could be someone listening that's like, well, how do I know? Right? Like, what
Yeah.
am I supposed, like, who's telling me, like, which is which? Right?
Yeah.
So that's such a great question. And let's see, when it comes to intuition, so I'm trying to, like, the way that so like, if you're in a place where you're completely disconnected, like, the way that I really started to reconnect to it was, number one, like we're saying, right? Awareness is the first step to everything. So you have to become aware of, the fact that that voice is present, right? So your intuition is like in here somewhere. Yeah, there's a voice, but it's like, but how do I tap in? And this was me literally. I remember learning, like, what is this magical concept, intuition? Like, I could just have the answers all the time. And I would Google, like, how do I tap into my intuition? How do I know what my intuition is saying to me? Right. And it didn't make sense. I was like, I don't get it. But really what it is where I like to like start people is like, you have two voices in your head. Right. Almost all the time. Right. I feel like most people can relate to like when you have a choice or decision to make. And that's all it is like everything is a choice or a decision. Right. It's like, I'm feeling bad. Well, now I have a choice to make about like what I'm going to do next. Right. So it's
Yeah.
like, what are the voices in your head saying? So you start by listening. Right. You just start by listening and just being open. Cause the thing is, especially like if we've been suppressing our intuition for a long time, we're in the
Mhm.
practice of our intuition comes through, we just automatically shut it down. And like a great example of this is I like to say, like, when it comes to work and career, it's like, or like business, number one thing is like, I don't know what I want to do. I don't like my job, but I don't know what job I want. I want to start a business, but I don't have an idea, right? So I always, the first thing I ask him, like, okay, this is going to sound silly, but what do you want to do? Right? Because it's like, well, if I knew, I wouldn't be coming to you. But it's because they actually haven't created the space and allowed like that space to really receive that question and just
Yeah.
open to listening to answers. Because what happens is something will come through and then immediately our mind comes in and it's like, well, I don't know how I would do that. Well, I'm not good enough for that. Well, that couldn't be a job, right? Yeah, literally, it's just like putting it out. And it happens so fast when we're in the habit really of not listening that we think that nothing even came through. Like we're so
Yeah.
used to, and you'll start to notice, like anyone listening too, is like when someone asks you a question, like once you become aware of this process, you notice like things come up and you kind of filter through until you feel like you've gotten to an answer that's good enough to actually share, you
Mm.
know? So the
Yeah.
practice is opening and listening to everything, right? Without judgment and allowing all of those things to come through and then acknowledging everything that came through, even if it makes no sense at all. Because the thing is, intuition is not going to make sense. Really, most of the time, it's gonna be actually like kind of the opposite of what would feel logical and make sense, right? So that's actually like a green flag, right? If you're like, well, what the fuck? Like that wouldn't make any sense. Can I swear on your podcast? You swore before, I think.
Yes, 100%. Please.
That makes no sense. How would I ever do that? That's a green flag. So
Yeah.
follow that thread, right? So the first step is literally allowing yourself to create the space. So whether that's like in a session with someone else, even just in a conversation with like a trusted loved one, with your journal. I love to just talk out loud, like just voice note memo, you know, and just allow actually the space for all of that to flow and come out, and don't try to like make it mean anything, and don't try to like need to find an answer in it yet. That's the first step. Um, of really, yeah, just bringing awareness to that voice. So then the second step is actually learning to accept what comes through, right? So we've now like we're listening. Now we have to learn how to like acknowledge and accept what actually came through. So for example, I was like, I don't know what I want to do. Like, I don't know what I want to do for a job. Right. And then once I'm like, okay, I'm going to open to just listening to like whatever comes through. And then maybe something that comes through is like, well, I would love if I could like have a podcast, or I would love if I could just, do music for a living. Right. But that's not realistic, but I'm not good enough for that. Right. And I shut it down. So now I have these things coming through, and this is like a very basic example. Now I have these things coming through. I've received them, and now I have to accept, right? Okay, well, what if it was possible for me?
Yeah.
Right? Like, what if I could do this? What would that look like? And that's probably where people spend the most time, is just opening up to that belief, kind of like we said with that epiphany,
Yeah.
right? So that's a second step, is learning to accept and open up to possibility. And really just like learning to accept and trust what's coming through. And so an exercise I like to give people is like practice opening and listening, right? And start with really small decisions and situations. So what am I going to eat today? Like, what do you want for dinner? When you're going out to eat at a restaurant, what am I going to wear today? How much time do we spend overthinking these decisions, right?
Yeah.
Like, oh my God, there's so many options on the menu. I don't know what I want. Like spending an hour, like going through trying on different outfits, right? So start with like those two things and just practice, like instead of kind of feeding that overthinking voice, right? Like what feels good. And so in this practice, right? Because people will be like, okay, well, like how do I like know though which one to listen to?
Yeah.
I have a few rules of thumb. So now this is like my process. Okay. So
Mhm.
number one, you tune into your body, right? And people are gonna be like, well, what does that even mean? Tune into my body? I don't know. It's like literally what feels open and light, and what feels like you want to pull back and feels like small and like contracting and dense, right? There are these different energies in your body. And to start to tune into this, you can think of something you love, right? Like think about an experience you love to do. Like for you, Bea, like it would be maybe like rollerblading, right? It's
Yeah.
like, how do I feel when I'm outside rollerblading, right? And like even maybe go rollerblade and then just take a second to notice like what sensations are in my body right now, right?
Exactly.
And you're probably going to feel like an openness in your chest, or like a lightness, or like maybe a buzziness, right? And then you start to learn what kind of sensations are associated with different emotions, right? And then it's like, well, what's a time when I feel really sad, right? Because it's like the thing is, our brains don't tell us how we're feeling. Our body tells our brain how we're feeling, right? It works from the bottom up. And so it's like, well, what sensations am I physically experiencing that are indicating to my brain that I'm sad? Like, how do I know I'm sad? I was actually just listening to a lecture on this the other day from, her name is Kyra Maestra, I think, and she's like a somatics practitioner. And she was saying, like, if any time anyone's like, well, I want this or I don't want this, she's like, where? Like, where don't you want it? You know? And so it's like coming back to this idea of how do I know I don't want it? It's because there's a feeling in my body that's telling me that. So really learning to start tuning in to those sensations, because the sensations are what hold the truth, right? So bringing it back to this example of like looking at a menu of like, what do I want? Right? Our intuition also speaks only in yes, no, right? So we don't want to be like, here are all your options. Which one? Right? We want to be like, all right, number one, like you could have pizza. Do you want pizza? Yes or no? Right? Do you want a salad? Yes or no? And we go through that way because when it's that yes, you're going to feel that light up. You're going to feel that yes. You're going to feel that fear come in, especially when you're first starting out. That's immediately going to be like, but what if you don't? Right? And that's another tip I like to give is like, but what if something else would be better? Right? Whichever voice starts with but, that's the one you don't want to listen to. All right. So your intuition will be normally the first voice that comes through, right? And then you also have those feelings to tune into. And then the voice that comes in with the but, the voice that comes in trying to justify things, trying to make excuses, the voice that's really chaotic, like we were saying, back to basic simplicity. Your intuition is very simple. Again, yes, no. It'll be a very calm voice. I like to imagine the angel and devil on your shoulder, right? The intuition is like the angel that's just like, well, you know that you really want this. And they don't even have to defend or argue more because they know it's true. And the devil's like, but this, what if this happened, right? And it's like, because it's like, if you think about someone trying to like defend themselves, they start to like go and like, but I was this, da, 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 da. And someone who knows that they have nothing to defend and they're just true, right? They're just like, I don't need to defend because just literally the fact that it's true is its defense in itself. It's inherently valid because it's my truth, right? Mind blowing.
I love that.
Yay! Yay. Yeah, that's a really, really big one. And like I keep saying I'm gonna do a podcast episode on this of like my kind of like 5 tips to go through, but I do have somewhere on my Instagram highlights in a story highlight. I think it's under my guidance highlight. I did a story on like my 5 kind of go-to tricks. Like, so one is the simple versus chaotic. One is the full body yes versus like the no. One is like voice of love versus fear. And there's 2 more kind of like little hacks you can use to start to tune in. But that's kind of, like an entry into the process. And then from there, it's really just like honing. And once you get comfortable trusting that in these small situations with very low stakes, you start to get more comfortable tuning in and listening in bigger situations. And it starts to become more natural to just be like, oh, this is a yes, this is a no. Because you start to really, just as quickly as our body makes the connection of like, I feel this, I'm sad, right? We're not consciously aware of like this process of feeling sensations in our bodies. Like our mind is like, I'm sad. We're just like, I'm sad. We just skip over the physical entirely because we're so used to it. You will get to that point where you skip over, okay, well, what am I feeling here? And it's just like, it's a yes, because that translation, like that communication process is so.
That is so true. Oh my God. I love this. And please guys go check out the highlights because I'm sure they're so like, oh, I love this so much because for me intuition is also like a really big thing, obviously, like in my business, in my life, like that's kind of like my compass, and everything that I do, like that's what I trust. I don't trust no one but myself with that. Honestly, and no one can tell you like what is your path and what you're meant to do and like what are your yeses, your or your no's. Like everyone has opinions, but ultimately you have to be the one to make the decisions for yourself, and your intuition knows best always. And something that for me personally really helped was that, building that connection with myself, and really something specific that helped for me was journaling, like spending time with my thoughts and my emotions and having like this fully safe space to just put it all out there. I remember having journaling passages from like a year before I broke up with my ex, already telling like I want to break up or I feel like I have to, or like all those things, like really creating that safe space where everything was allowed to come through. Because a lot of the times, like you said, we're so quick to like dismiss our intuition. Like we're so quick to just like, yeah, shut up. Like you don't matter. Or, we just don't even go there anymore. And so the only thing we hear is already like fear based. It's already like our egos trying to protect us or trying to like put us or like make us sit still and not really, change anything. Cause that's the thing, intuition, it's not just irrational and crazy, but it's also like challenging sometimes because it will push you to do things that you never thought you were going to do, you never thought you were
Mhm.
capable of. It's going to defy every limit that you've ever
Mhm.
imposed on yourself. You know what I mean? And so it's like, we don't want to listen. It's much more comfortable to just ignore. And we do that as a way to like protect ourselves. But obviously, then we also feel super unfulfilled in our lives and everything sucks and we're disconnected and we're sad. So there's a reason why we're like, please follow your intuition. Um, but yeah, I just feel like that is so, so important to really build that connection with yourself, like really listen to your body, which for me felt so like foreign. You know, it was a foreign concept. I did not like, what do you mean listen to my body? Like, if someone beats
Mhm.
me, I can feel that. But is that what you mean? Like,
Right.
eat a good food, like I love it, but you know, you don't go any deeper than that. And we're just really used to being disconnected. I think it's also a thing. Well, I don't want to say if it's a thing from this society. I do think that this connection is more and more, you know, just more likely to happen because of being on our phones, having so much going on around us. And that was for me a big pivotal moment in my journey. It was to actually take a step back because I did a what's it called, like basically after high school I did an entire gap year, that's the word. I did a gap year and it was the first time that I actually sat with myself and so much started to come through. Like I realized, oh my god, like a lot of my decisions are based on these wounds and these limits and these blah blah, and like you never make space to listen to those things, and so you keep going and you keep choosing the same things because you're not even fully conscious that, you know, that's not the way. But when you sit and you actually like allow that space to listen to what's going on a deeper level, it helps you to awake to all these things of like, oh wow, this is out of alignment, this doesn't resonate, this doesn't feel good, this is not it, like all those things. Like nowadays you were saying something, it was so funny, like I started laughing because basically, you know, the intuition that you create that, you know, body mind response, and it's quicker and quicker each time. Like it's so funny because when I'm cooking, I'm literally like cooking with intuition. I'm just like, I
Yeah.
don't know why I should use this spice, but I'm gonna put it here. And it's always the best fucking combos, but also the like most random ones. I would never logically or rationally decide, oh, let's mix this with that. But then it works. You know what I mean? It works.
Yes.
And I love that. And it's like the most simple things. And that builds up over time. And I really like what you said about starting small, because sometimes we want to change our lives overnight and we
Mhm.
put ourselves on like we kind of like, yeah, we put ourselves with so much responsibility or so many expectations of like, oh, I'm gonna change my life overnight and I'm gonna like listen to my intuition about this giant thing. It's like the best way to really build lifelong and long lasting change in your life, sustainable change, is to start with the smaller things like cooking, like watching Netflix, for example. Like instead of, you know, going and I don't even know the term for it, but just scrolling on your Netflix and trying to find, you know, a good show, you're just like taking
Scrolling.
good. Yeah. And I think that definitely helps a lot. And that's kind of how I do it now in my dating life, honestly. Like I'm not like honestly, so I'm talking to this guy. This is just happening. That's why I was laughing. But because basically he's super cute and we matched on Hinge and we basically haven't talked that much, like at all. He sent me an audio, asked me for my number just so we could like talk about like
Mhm.
outside the app. And I sent him my number. He sends me a voice note and I don't know what it is, but as soon as I'm listening, it's like 10 seconds of an audio and I'm like, this is a no. Like I already know
Yep.
this
Oh,
person.
I love this.
I literally don't fucking know why, but I just fucking know. It
Yes.
happens, you know?
No, that is so good, Bia, because seriously, like that is such a great example. And it's because of the energy, right? Like I was saying before, like, you know, if you're talking to someone and you're just on a different frequency, it literally just won't resonate. It won't click because you're like on different wavelengths, literally,
Yeah.
right? So it's like, and I think, you know, especially with dating, that's such a good example because I'm hearing, like, I know I've seen past examples with my sister and my friends, and, it's like the voicemail comes through and you're just kind of like, you're like, no, I'm not into it. And then they'll listen and they'll be like, well, what's so bad about it? We're like, why? Right. Or like, maybe I should give him a chance. You haven't met him in person yet. Right. And it's like, I just know, right? And like everyone is conditioned to like try to like, question
Give it a
that voice
try.
and question that knowing, right? Give it a try. And it's like, no, I actually don't need any justification. I don't need any reason other than it's just my truth, right? Like we were just saying with Angel, like, and I think it's really an important practice of learning to give ourselves permission to just trust that right away from the jump
Yeah.
and not needing to see everything through until we can actually come up with a logical reason. Because that's a thing in general is like, we always are going to make decisions based off of what we feel, right? And then we will find, a more logical explanation to justify whatever we're feeling. So
Yeah.
it's like, if we could just like, we're wasting time, honestly, a lot of the time trying to explain. And it's like, no, actually, I just know, right? I just know. And I'm going to move on now and not waste my time on something I know isn't for me, right? Something just came through and then I lost it. But on that note of giving yourself permission, something you said earlier that I kind of wanted to circle back to was about blaming, like the Mercury retrograde and things like that. And I feel so passionate about reminding people that you can give yourself permission to follow, because I notice a lot of people in this space, they get really excited about their astrology and their human design
Yeah.
and things like that, right? And I'm all here for it, like they have their time and their place, but I see a lot of people, they get very attached, and it's almost like they can't even describe who they are or what they want without drawing back to these things for justification, right? Well, I'm a projector, so that's why I do this, right? Or like, oh, it's my Mars and Leo, and that's why I struggle with this thing, or I have to blah, 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 right? And it's like, yes, we love to feel seen. We love to feel heard. We love to feel understood. We love to feel validated. Again, they have their time and their place, and they can be helpful tools, right? For getting to that place where you do come to those, where you are able to give yourself permission, like we were just talking about, you take the steps, then it becomes natural. So they can be tools in that transition to be like, oh, like, yes, now I know what it feels like to give myself permission to follow till we get to the point where we can give it to ourselves. But it's really, really important to remember that you have that ability to give yourself permission to follow it without needing to point to anything outside of you, right? And so it's like, what if I could just say, this is what I want, and this is what I don't want, or this is something that I'm struggling with, or this is something that comes really naturally to me, this is something that works for me, this is something that doesn't. And I don't have to point back to like, well, because this is in my human design, right? Or like, this is in my astrology, right? And that's why I struggle with this. Like, you don't need to defend why you're struggling with it, right? Or like why it's a challenge for you. We're all human, like we all have it. And it can also, sometimes it can actively disconnect us from our intuition, right?
Yeah.
Because it's kind of like a devil in sheep's clothing. It's like, well, this is a spiritual tool, right? So it's not like, it can't be disconnecting me from my intuition. And again, it all depends on the intention, how you're using it. Because there are times when it could help connect you, but it could be actively disconnecting you, because instead of tuning in with yourself, you're now immediately going to the astrology or going to the human design book for the answer, and that's what I help, people with in business too, is like, again, there's human design for business and that's great, but like, I want you to be able to just tune in and be like, what do I want to do? What would feel fun to me to lead, right? But like you said, at the end of the day, it's you, bitch. Like, you got to be able to rely on yourself. You don't want to feel dependent on really anything outside of you. And I love what you said too about how important it is to cultivate that safety. Because if we don't feel safe in ourselves, that's when we're going to not be trusting ourselves, and we're not going to feel safe to listen to what's coming, right? But if we know how to cultivate that safety from within, then we're able to rely on ourselves and really build that trust. And I know I'm kind of bouncing all over, but when you said about this is me. I bounce all over. And I just bounce all over, and I don't know if it's in my chart or not. About like creating that space to journal and like creating a safe space. Like, I love that you highlighted that, because we talked about creating space, but that space has to be a space where you feel safe to open up. Because if you don't feel safe, then it doesn't even matter. And that safety is so important. And it's funny because even yesterday I was on a call with a mentor. She was asking me questions and I noticed, like, I was observing the filtering process happen in my mind.
Yeah.
But it's like, I was like, I couldn't get myself to vocalize something, like, I was like, I know I want to like say this, but it's like, there's a block. And she actually had me get a pillow and I held the pillow up in front of my face. And as soon as I held the pillow up, I started crying. So it was like this really, like, it reminded me of like a little kid, like they'll put their hands up in front and they like think that you can't see them. Like it
Yeah.
was like my inner child was like, yeah, I know, like feeling protected, like I'm not safe to like show this emotion, even in a very safe space with a trusted
Yeah.
mentor. Sometimes it can really be that intense to where then literally the act of just like putting up this little shield, like now that part of me felt safe to be expressed. So I'm just really like glad that you highlighted how important it is to cultivate those feelings of safety and create a space that feels safe for you, because you're never going to learn to give yourself that permission if you don't feel safe to do so, to tie it all
Yeah, of
together.
course. And I love that. That's so beautiful. I know sometimes like we kind of try to run away from that disconnection with that connection with ourselves
Mm-hmm.
because so much can come up. And I think that's one of the reasons why we often have that tendency to distract ourselves, like especially in the beginning, like if something was happening in my life, I was going through a hard time or whatever, I would scroll on my phone or binge watch shows and I would never
Mm-hmm.
actually sit through the emotions. And that not only created that disconnection, but that safety like loses itself. And I love using the example of imagine a kid that is crying and like asking for her dad or her mom, and they're just like, suck it up, like, go
Mm-hmm.
fuck yourself or whatever you say to yourself when you're feeling that way. That child is going to grow up to never trust their parents ever again. And it's the same that happens with you. And so I really love journaling for that reason. And it has definitely helped me create that safety. But yeah, like I totally get what you're saying because it's like it's definitely a process to create that safety with yourself, but it's so powerful, and I think that's what really allows you to like have the space to listen. So I really really love that, and I completely lost my train of thought, but we're just gonna ignore that.
I know we have so many threads going. That's why I'm like taking notes. I'm like, I don't want to forget. This is so good. There's so much energy moving.
I know I love that. I actually never took notes before, but I'm like, I should start doing that probably.
Because
But
I've been too many times where I've like, someone has said something on an interview and I'm like, oh yes. And I have this like really powerful thought. And then like they like go on their own journey. And then by the
yeah.
time we get there, I'm like, oh, now you've sparked 7 more thoughts. And I'm like, but there was this really powerful thing. But it's like a
Yeah.
balance of like trusting that if it's really important, it'll come back through. But yeah, I do like to have,
No,
like with everything, with the notes.
I love that. I love that method because I think that's really helpful. So I'm gonna give that a try next time so that this doesn't happen. But so we're in this journey of talking about intuition and all of that, and I'm absolutely loving this talk. I think this is such a
Me
powerful,
too.
fun conversation. Um, and I'm curious, like then when we have that intuition and we start recognizing all those things, a lot of what you do is help women like really understand their careers and their
Yeah.
business path and like their passion, their purpose, like all of that. um so what is that bridge, I guess, and how do you kind of walk that walk for the people that don't really know what they want right now? Like maybe they want to start a business, maybe they want to start something of their own, maybe they don't, they just want to like pursue something else, but they're just feeling unfulfilled in their careers and their lives in general.
Yeah. So great question, because I know there are so many people in this place.
Yeah.
Um,
There.
so there's a couple things. So number one, it depends where you're at. Kind of what we were talking about, everyone's starting at a different point. And so it's like there are different things, kind of like we were talking too about like learning how to connect back to your body. Like something like depending how disconnected you are, like I could give advice that like might be not accessible for you, but it'd be accessible for someone else. Like we have different starting points. So a couple things that I would say is number one, like if you're just super unfulfilled or like super burnt out in your career, the number one thing you want to prioritize is again getting that safety back in your body, because really when you're burnt out, it's like you're just so dysregulated. You're in this chronic state of stress. And so whatever you need to get yourself, just to a place of like safety and regulation, right? Where you're not in this chronic state of stress. So, for example, when I actually left my job, I was so burnt out. And I thought it was just because of the job. It was a combination of the job and I was in that toxic relationship. And I was like, got to the point where I was like, I literally don't know what else to do. I can't function. I was in a chronic freeze state basically. And I would go into work and just like, I couldn't get anything done. And I literally quit. It wasn't like, I have this business idea I'm going to go for, and I just need the courage to go for it. I was like, I feel too guilty to continue to take a paycheck from you because I can't get anything done. And so I left, and I was kind of at the time, I remember saying to my boss, like, I don't know if I'm depressed because I hate my job or if I hate my job because I'm depressed, but I know that I just need the space to figure it out. So creating that space is important. But, again, if you're still having things in your life that are contributing to that burnout and draining your energy and stressing you constantly, the space isn't going to matter, right? Again, because the safe is still not safe, right?
Mhm.
So I actually didn't get the clarity until I also left the relationship. So what you really want to do is start to just notice, again, in terms of the small stakes and the big stakes, like what else in my life is misaligned? Like what little shifts can I make to kind of, bring the joy back into my life and decrease the stressors in my life? That doesn't have to be leaving my job with no plan yet, right? Sometimes it might be. Like for me, that I was like, I just need to go and I'll figure it out. Jump in and out will appear. Right. But it's like, depending on what your capacity and what's accessible to you, is like, start by looking at little things. Like, how's your sleep schedule?
Yeah.
Like, can you start to just fix your sleep or spend more time in nature? I know it sounds corny and basic, but these little ways of regulating your nervous system, right? Like starting to like practice breath work, like taking 5 minutes for yourself in the morning before you go into your day, right? To how can I start to fill my cup up more? Right. And I know it's hard when you're in that situation that feels so draining and it feels like it's taking over my life. Right. And it's like, well, if I take 5 minutes to breathe in the morning, it's not going to make a fucking difference. I still hate my job. Right. Like,
Yeah.
so I know that it's going to feel like it won't make a difference. But if you can consistently start to integrate really these ways of regulating your nervous system and of filling your cup and of spending time with yourself and just prioritizing your own energy, little ways, like just how can I bring more joy into other parts of my life?
Mhm.
That's huge. To help you kind of start to get that clarity. Seeking support, remembering that you don't have to do it all on your own. Like if you're in this space, right? Like go like schedule a session with a mentor, go to therapy, talk to loved ones, trusted loved ones, right? And remember, like I like to, because I don't want to be that person that's like, everyone needs to go to therapy, everyone needs a coach. Like, yes, we have a community and like a support system, but at the same time, they're not, you know, it can be a little riskier because they may not realize they're projecting their own stuff onto you. And if you don't know how to realize when they're projecting, then it could do more harm than good. So you have to be like careful with that, like of like how you're having that space held for you. But yeah, just like, and just letting yourself express really, because at least I like in that burnout, you're really in this freeze. And so it's like, how can you let yourself express, finding that creative outlet for you or that emotional outlet? So like, again, it could be rollerblading. Like for me, it was music. I love what you said about like when you started journaling and that was how you really started to like realize these things. Cause I had the same exact thing when I was in my relationship. Like a year before we actually ended it and I was like getting into songwriting, I remember one time I sat down with my guitar and this whole song came out about like how I wanted to leave the relationship. And I was like it was like the song had a mind of its own. It just came out of
Yeah.
me like, oh, okay. I guess that's how I feel. Like, good to know. Where did that come from? And I was terrified of it and I deleted the song and I just forgot about it for a year. Yeah, so just like how can I, allow like more self-expression? That can be movement, it could be dance, or just like bringing, like joining. I know these are like the corniest recommendations, but they work. I always say like cliches are cliche for a reason, right? So when I was in that situation in the terrible relationship, burnt out at my job, I joined pole dancing classes because I was like, this will bring me community. This will allow me to express myself. This sounds fun. And it just sounds like something that would be enjoyable. And for a while, those were the highlight of my week. Monday nights was like, I would leave class and I would be like, wow, this is the only time of the week that I feel happy. Right.
Wow.
So, like, find things like that. And I'm sure that there's already at least one or two things that bring you those feelings. And if you really, really are wanting this change, right? Because again, you might be in a place where you just need the struggle for a bit longer and you're not ready to make the change. But if you really, really are wanting this change, I always say, like, you will prioritize what is important to you, right? So make time for these things. Nervous system regulating tools, right? You can literally Google, but it's like breathing, spending time in your body, spending time in nature, like sensory things, like spending time with a loved one, cuddling up with a blanket, whatever it is. Make time to integrate those throughout your day. And it doesn't even have to feel like it's helping. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't have to be like, oh, I'm feeling so stressed.
Yeah.
I breathe for 5 minutes and I still feel stressed. It's still
Yeah.
having an impact, right? It's kind of
Yeah.
the theme of the episode is just trust that it's all leading there. So that's like if you're really in that like really low state. If you're kind of in a place where like you have a bit more capacity, right? I would just literally my favorite question to ask is, okay, well, if you could wave a magic wand and just have your life look however you want it to look, what would it look like? Like, what would you be doing? How would you be spending your time? And I feel like that question, it kind of helps put you into like this fantasy land.
Yeah.
And when you get into the fantasy land, it's like, well, I'm just like playing pretend. Like, I don't have to filter it through this lens of what's realistic and possible.
Yeah.
And that helps you really access what are those desires that are really on your heart, right? And then once you have those again, it's like, now I actually know what I want. Now it's just a matter of working through the fear and the belief that I can't do it. And actually, again, like how I say, like we tap into intuition, we filter through a strategic lens. So it's basically the same thing. It's like, now I know what I want. And it doesn't even have to be like, I purposely don't say like, what would you be doing for a career if you could wave a magic wand? Because that still puts kind of a filter on it, right? It's like, what would your life look like? Like, how would you spend your day to day? Right. Because then we start to notice like, okay, what brings you joy? What kind of activities do you like? And I love to like give this example of kind of how I knew that there were things I enjoyed doing back then. Like I was a computer scientist. I don't know if I actually ever said what my job was. I was a computer scientist. Many people, when they hear that, they're like, what? You were a computer scientist? Like that at all. But the one part of that I really loved was debugging. I loved solving problems and getting to the root of the problem. Right. And then another thing I loved, because people always say, well, what would you do if you like weren't getting paid? Right. Which is a helpful question. I do like that question as well. But again, it all depends on like when you're ready to receive, because people asked me that. And I was like, well, like, what do you make time for basically outside of work? Because again, you make time for what's important to you. So what are you making time for? Notice what you're making time for. And one thing I was like, well, I always will make time for like basically giving advice to my friends and helping my friends like talk through problems. I love helping them solve their problems. Right.
That's cute.
But I was like, but I couldn't make that a job. What could I do for a job like other than like start an advice column? Like I just didn't have, I was filtering it through that lens. And so I couldn't be open to the possibilities, right? And then I started teaching pole and I was like, well, I love like helping people get into their bodies, right? And I knew all these separate things that I loved doing. And I could tell you, I love talking, right? Like
I get you.
simple things that people are like, well, that's not a job. I can't just talk for a living. Hell yes, you can. How many people are just full-time podcasters or, you know what I mean? Like, hell yes, you can talk for a living. If that's your passion and your joy and that's where you light up, right? Like you light up in something for a reason, right? So it's like noticing where you light up, right? And if you're super fucking interested in something, it's not a coincidence. Okay. So like all these things that I loved, and I even like, I remember my boss, he left to start his own business. And so I was learning a lot about entrepreneurship for a while. And I was like, entrepreneurship is so cool. I was listening, binging podcasts on it, but I was like, but I could never do it. Not for me. Like, that's just, I'm not I'm not smart enough, like, but it's so cool to like learn about these other people that do it. And right.
Yeah.
And it's like,
Uh-huh.
John Marie, like you hate your job and you're binging entrepreneurship podcasts, put two and two together, right? So it's like, yes, like you can't force the clarity if you're not ready for it yet, but that is really what I would guide people to do is like pull out these pieces, right? And look at what I do now is I solve people's problems, right? I help people. I do somatic, I help them get into their body. I talk, I have a podcast, right? Like it's literally a perfect combination of all of those things I already knew I loved. So it's like
Mm.
the first step is just believing that you do have access to the answers, right? And then like create the space, like we said, for it to drop in. You don't need to try to force it. But if you, this is what I'll end on with this too.
Mhm.
Follow the first nudge. So what I would say with intuition is this is the thing that holds people back is if they can't see the big picture. Well, I know
Yeah.
I like this, but I don't know how I could turn that into a career. I'm not sure this would work, right? Like your intuition will never give you the whole puzzle right away. It'll give you a piece at a time. Because if it gives you the whole puzzle, it gives you the answer key, right? You don't learn, you don't learn and grow. And the whole point is grow, to expand and to deepen your knowing of yourself, right? Have you
Yeah.
ever seen um 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 what's the movie? Memento?
Memento? I don't
Mhm.
know. What is it
Or
about?
have you ever seen Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind?
Yeah, I have.
Okay, so in that movie, if anyone hasn't seen this movie, pause the episode and go watch it because I'm going to give a little bit of spoiler. Um, that whole movie, like I loved because it's like they knew this thing. Um, they had the relationship and then they wrote the tape to themselves, right? That's like it's not going to work out. But then they meet, and they have the spark. And even though they know I have energy moving, they know, like literally heard from their own voice, it's not going to work out. They have to follow it, you know? And so it's like that remembering that, like we have to follow those nudges and those sparks, and it's for a reason. And it's impossible to learn the lesson without doing that.
Mhm.
Okay. Like, even if future you came and said, John Marie, like, this is not going to work, you're wasting your time. Like, I literally have to go through that process to viscerally understand and have that lesson integrated into me, right? So all of that to say is that's our intuition can't give us the answer because it wouldn't do anything, right? So we will
Yeah.
only get one nudge at a time. And so just start with what is the first nudge and bringing it really, really back, right? If you're like, I don't know what I want with this situation, is detaching it from, okay, I'm following this nudge because I needed to lead to my dream career. It's just like trusting that each nudge is another step along that path. And everything will truly magically fall into alignment when you start to just follow those nudges more and more. Right. And so right now, your nudge, like it's like tune in, be like, well, what do I want to do? Like, what is the thing that I've been like getting pinged to do and I just keep not doing it? Right. That might be literally something totally random, like clean your room or like go to this coffee shop like that you haven't been to in a while
Yeah.
or take a bath, right? It could be something so simple and
The
you
usual
really
person.
can't make sense of it. Yeah, exactly. And start to follow those nudges. Like for me, that first nudge was like pull, like take that pole dancing class. You've been wanting to take that pole dancing class for a while. Take that class, right? And then I started taking the class, right? And then I made this community, and then I started teaching there, and then I started like learning how much I love helping people with their bodies, and then I like branched out to other studios, and I started making my own classes, and then I started infusing more spirituality into those classes, and then I started looking into online marketing because I was like, how can I market these classes? And then I came across like the online coaching industry. And then I was like, oh my God, that's what I want to do.
Oh,
Right.
yeah.
Just because I followed that nudge to take a pole dancing class, I never would have thought that would have led here. Right. And like, so really just like getting those things that you already know are not aligned out of your field, leave the relationship, like decrease the stress as much as possible, tend to your body and your nervous system, and just start following those little nudges. And the more you start to follow them, the brighter they will become. And the more areas of your life they'll start to illuminate and everything. I like the last thing I'll say is I imagine it like this alignment arrow. Like there's this arrow guiding you where you want to go, right? But it's not like lit up. And so every nudge you follow, it lights up another piece of the arrow, and you start to see more of a direction. And you don't necessarily see the whole arrow, but you
Yeah.
start to see like more and more of a direction. And then you get into that full alignment because you followed enough nudge, you followed your intuition enough times that now you have this glowing arrow like this way. And that's the clarity in your vision that you're looking
Yeah.
for.
Oh, I love this so much. I think that is so important for people to understand, like, what really, like, following your intuition looks like, because we are always looking for this, like, perfect expectation of, like, oh my God, enlightenment, and I know everything, and there's nothing I don't know. And it can be really frustrating when we constantly are in the unknowing. Like, that happens a lot. And especially when you're going through periods of change and transitions, it's going to be like unknown after unknown after unknown. And the only thing that you actually know is that like inner voice. It's the like inner knowing of like, there's something here. Like, let me follow this path, or let me like take this one step. Let me like do this one thing, even though I have no idea why I'm doing it, like what it's
Mhm.
going to look like tomorrow, where it's leading me. But right now, I'm not being told for a reason, like you were saying. And I personally have been through that phase of transition. We've talked about this a little before this
Mhm.
call. Like I've been going through that phase of transition in my business where I've noticed that a lot of things are shifting and changing. And it's so scary and terrifying because you have no idea. Like suddenly you feel like you lose that control, and it
Mhm.
freaks you out because you want to hold on to something. You want to hold on to comfort and familiarity and like,
Right.
and suddenly you don't know anything. You don't know what it's going to look like. You don't know where you're going, blah, blah, blah. But then it's like what you said, follow those things that bring you joy, that make you feel connected, not to just yourself, but that truly make you feel that fulfillment and purpose in life. Because purpose is not necessarily this like giant thing, this like giant mission. Sometimes it's just like when I do this, for example, like when I don't know, sit in nature and when I'm just like being, I feel fully connected. And that is enough for me in that moment. Like sometimes that's what purpose and fulfillment can look like. It doesn't necessarily have to be this like real big thing. And if you follow that consistently, like each time you notice something that lights you up and that brings you joy, it will lead to something that is going to build up into whatever path you're meant to go on. Whether that's, in your love life, it's going to lead to your soulmate husband, whether it's
Mhm.
your career and it's going to lead to like something that you never even thought was available for you, that you never even thought existed, because the truth is there's like endless amounts of like career paths and we don't know
Mhm.
like half of them. And if you allow yourself to like discover and go on that process, I feel like you're gonna just find so much more, and it's gonna be so, so beautiful when you fully allow yourself to trust that process. So I definitely think that having that perspective, especially for someone that is just starting and has no idea what the fuck is going on in their lives, I feel like that's so, so important. That's really all you need.
Yeah. 100%. And it's really like, how can I just allow? Like, how can I allow this to unfold without needing to put pressure on it, without needing to put a timeline on it, without needing to put a rush on it and have the answer right away? And really, that's like coming back to presence, like just being present in the moment. Like, I don't need a rush to like figure this out or get here, right? Like, how can I find joy in every moment? And like that allowance, like allow, surrender, receives, like one of my mantras, like, allow, surrender, and you will receive, and it will all just fall into place. And yeah, that trust is so important. I know it can feel difficult for people to like, to build that trust, right? Especially if you've never done it before. And that's why starting on a small scale is so great. And also remembering, like, I love to like encourage people to notice the times when you have followed that guidance
Yeah.
and it worked out really well, right? Like, what are all the times when it worked out perfectly, when the universe came through for you, right? Because we often don't actually take time to stop and reflect on those experiences and integrate those into our system, because you can only build trust through trusting, right? And so if we don't stop to realize, oh, universe came through for me there. That worked out perfectly there when I listened to that nudge, even though it made no sense at the time, right? Like that happened and went
Yeah.
well, right? And like stop and really like bask in that gratitude, first of all. And then also realize like we're literally building evidence that when we take that leap of faith, it does work out. And that's like really helpful for our little like survival brain that is like, no, we don't have any proof that's going to work, right? It's like, well, we can actually build evidence by stopping to integrate those moments and experiences and build that trust along the way.
Love that.
And I love what you said about the purpose, because it's like, that really is, that's all we're like, our purpose is just to grow, right? Like your purpose is the process. Your purpose is not to get to that end point. Your purpose is literally just to experience and to go through this process. And yeah, I wrote something down here, but it's scribbly. So your purpose is the process.
I love that. That's beautiful. 100%. Wow. That has wow, I've loved this conversation so much. I had no
Me
idea we were
too.
going to
And
be
what a
talking.
beautiful note there to end on too, of just like,
Right? Yeah.
allow it, it'll unfold. Your purpose is just to be in it. Just be
Yeah.
you.
Exactly. I think that's gonna give a lot of peace of mind and hope to a lot of people listening, and also empower them to really just, yeah, choose the next right thing, that you don't have to know it all to take that next
Mhm.
step. I love this so much. Thank you so much for coming. This has been so, so fun.
Thank you so much, Via. This was such an amazing conversation. I'm so
Yes.
happy we did this. I can't wait to listen back. I'm like, I don't even know what we just said for the past 90 minutes, but I know it was like so potent and powerful as fuck. So I'm
Yeah.
like, I
100%.
feel it, right? It's like, I feel this energy. I don't know what I said, but I feel good. So it must have been something good.
Exactly. Exactly.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hey guys, it's me again. Hope you loved the episode. Thank you so much for listening to our conversation. Remember to go check out Bia's page. She is a spiritual life coach. She's also an amazing singer, and she has a lot of super fun stuff going on. So check her out. Thank you so much again for listening. As always, please, if you got something from this episode, if something stuck out to you, if you had a breakthrough, or if you just enjoy listening, then please, if you have not already, go leave a rate or a review for the podcast. Share the episode with a friend if you know anybody that is wanting to get more into their self-healing journey, or that is wanting to find their purpose or connect to their intuition more, or anything like that. Then send it their way. Thank you so much for all of your support. I love you. Have a great rest of your day or night, wherever you are. Don't forget to stop, take a deep breath, and smile. And I will talk to you next week. Bye.